Hey guys, what's up? As a fellow indie developer, chances are good that you are the game designer or co-designer for your game. That means it's your job to come up with a game loop that offers a fair challenge, a clear resolution, and an exciting reward. And this can be blown up to the macro level where we're talking about completing an entire game area or even an entire game to complete the story or to unlock new game plus or whatever it is. It can also be boiled all the way down to the micro level where we're just talking about one little room in your game where maybe you dodge a few obstacles and then get a reward. But your role as game designer goes beyond just making your game fun or adding gamified elements to your game. Your role, a lot of the time, will boil down to how you want your game to make players feel. And there are many obvious things we can do to our games to invoke a certain emotion from players, like the proper combination of story elements, music, sound design, effects, and even the level of challenge that the game offers. But there is a whole world of secrets that game designers utilize to help make players feel or experience something in a very particular way. And these are secrets because they do it with no communication to the player. I was fascinated by some of these, so I thought it would be fun to share some of them with you. Because some of these are really clever, and you just never know what might help you overcome a design challenge that you're facing. Now, one that I've become intimately familiar with is how platformers lie to you. Most good platformers these days will give players a slight edge by allowing them to jump off of a platform, even when the player is technically not even touching the ground anymore. We call this coyote time. And a similar idea, many platformers implement what's called jump buffering, which means when you press the jump button here, even though you're not touching the ground, you will jump once you hit the ground. This makes the game feel more responsive. Apex hang time is another common platformer trick, where if the player continues holding their jump button through the apex of the jump, or the peak of the jump, then they'll get just a little extra distance than they otherwise would have, making those hard to reach platforms a little bit more manageable. And by the way, we recently released a 2D platformer controller that will show you how to implement all of these tricks. And you'll notice that this is an extremely common thread. Designers often give players tiny little advantages or edges like this. And in the case of platformers, they do this to make the game feel fair and extremely responsive, because players don't always have the response time that they think they do. Devil May Cry and BioShock use a completely different trick to accomplish the same feeling. If an enemy is behind the player, the enemies will slow down their attack patterns. This is to avoid the players feeling frustrated. Not that frustration is necessarily a bad emotion for your game to evoke, but it's not usually good if your players are frustrated because they think your game is unfair. Now, in reality, not many players could get surrounded by a multitude of enemies that have the same level of aggressiveness, the same skill level, the same speed, and be able to make it out alive. You can only focus on so many things at once, so slowing down enemies that are not directly in front of you does seem like a smart approach to take. Or you could do what Half-Life 1 did, and if there are more than 2 enemies you're engaging with, only 2 enemies will attack. The rest will either just sit there or they'll run off in a random direction pretending to flank you. Resident Evil 4 took another approach and used a dynamic difficulty system, which is really clever. But one trick they used to keep players from getting stuck and to help players avoid feeling frustrated or discouraged, they would gradually spawn fewer enemies if you continued to die. So players that performed well and didn't die very often got the intended challenge level, whereas players that died a lot were given a little bit of grace to make the game more manageable for them, which I think this is a really smart system. Even Pac-Man, a game that was invented in 1980, utilized some really clever tricks to avoid players from feeling frustrated or making the game too difficult. You'll notice when you're playing Pac-Man that not all 4 ghosts chase you the entire time. Sometimes 1 or 2 of them will kind of just saunter off into a corner somewhere, and then they'll rally and start coming after you again. But having 4 aggressive AIs constantly be moving towards the player all of the time would just be too exhausting. So there's some forgiving navigation behavior baked into the ghosts. But also, and I didn't know this until recently, but Pac-Man can take the corners just slightly faster than the ghosts can, giving players just the tiniest edge. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, then thank you if you leave a like or a comment. Now, so far, we've mostly just been talking about giving players advantages to help them avoid feeling frustrated. But there are secrets that game designers use to solve all kinds of problems in games. For example, in a game like Spelunky, where dark levels can be assigned randomly, how do you avoid speedrunners from having to go through this? That kind of ruins their entire run. Well, Spelunky actually does not spawn dark levels if you manage to beat the prior level in less than 30 seconds. Problem solved. Blizzard uses all sorts of complex algorithms to determine when legendary gears should be dropped in their Diablo games. But in Diablo 3, they introduced a pity timer, so that if you were playing for long enough and you got no legendary drops, eventually you were guaranteed one. Games like Diablo keep players coming back for more because of the excitement of constantly finding new gear. So adding something like that to ensure that people get something exciting once in a while, that's a really smart thing to do. Because sometimes randomness in statistics will work against players if they just happen to get unlucky for a little while. Some games use secret design patterns to control how people play the game. For example, in XCOM, if players stay passive for too long, the enemies will actually ramp up their aggressiveness. This will force players to think on their feet and change up their playstyle. And in some Call of Duty games, there are certain areas where if the player doesn't move forward, there are just infinite enemy spawns. So if you think that you can just camp out and slowly pick off the enemies one by one, then you're out of luck. And some games have done some really interesting things just to add excitement or spectacle to a fight. For example, in Luft Trousers, I have no idea if I'm saying that right, the first few enemies in that game miss you on purpose to make you feel like you're really good at dodging. Many shooters make the last little sliver of health left on your health bar actually it's worth more than it otherwise would be. This increases the odds of the player making a comeback. Or another common one is that the last bullet deals a lot more damage than all the other bullets, increasing your odds to clutch a win. Apparently in Shadow of Mordor, some of the fights would be prolonged for spectacle by dynamically adding health back to the enemy. As a game designer, you sometimes have to think outside of the box to get the players to feel the way you want them to feel. Giving them a slight edge can make them feel like a complete badass, or it can just help them get through a really difficult level. You can use hidden mechanics to reduce or eliminate bad luck RNG or random number generation, or even help speedrunners have a more enjoyable time with your game. And you can use hidden mechanics and tactics to increase excitement and spectacle for your game. There's a really awesome Twitter thread that I stumbled across that has all sorts of little examples like this that developers have used over the years, and I'll link it down below just in case you're interested. That's all I got, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.